Hello, students. I am Upender Joshi from English Marcus, and welcome to today's lesson, Poets and Pancakes, Chapter 6 from the Class 12 Flamingo textbook. In this chapter, Ashoka Mitran, a renowned film writer, takes us on a nostalgic journey to a time when film studios were the true stars, overshadowing individual actors. Specifically, he shares his experiences at Gemini Studios in Madras, now Chennai, under the guidance of S. Stasan, a pioneer in Tamil and Indian cinema. Let's begin the chapter by knowing a little about its author. Ashoka Mitran, a Tamil writer, recounts his years at Gemini Studios in his book, My Years with Boss, which talks of the influence of movies on every aspect of life in India. The Gemini Studios, located in Chennai, was set up in 1940. It was one of the most influential film-producing organizations of India in the early days of Indian filmmaking. Its founder was S. Vasan. The duty of Ashoka Mitran in Gemini Studios was to cut out newspaper clippings on a wide variety of subjects and store them in files. Many of these had to be written out by hand. Although he performed an insignificant function, he was the most well-informed of all the members of the Gemini family. The following is an excerpt from his book, My Years with Boss. Before we delve into the detailed explanation, let's have a look at its theme. The overarching theme of the chapter revolves around cultural interactions and ideological conflicts within the vibrant setting of Gemini Studios. Through vivid anecdotes and character sketches, the narrative delves into the complexities of a film studio environment, highlighting the juxtaposition of artistic creativity with political and social influences. The chapter reflects on the broader socio-political landscape of post-independence India, where traditional values, emerging modernity, and ideological battles, particularly between communism and anti-communism, shape the daily lives and professional choices of the individuals within the studio. Now we will begin the paragraph-wise explanation of the chapter. Before we do so, I recommend you to pause and read text on each slide before listening to its explanation. This approach will deepen your understanding as we go through our detailed analysis. Let us begin the explanation now. The author begins the chapter by describing the makeup department of the Gemini Studio. Pancake was a popular brand of makeup material used extensively at Gemini Studio. Iconic actresses like Greta Garbo, Miss Gohar, and Vijay Antimala might have used it, but Rati Agnihotri probably hadn't heard of it. The makeup department was housed in what was once believed to be Robert Clive's stables, though his historical presence in the city was brief but impactful. In these lines, the author describes the makeup room of Gemini Studio. The makeup room resembled a hair-cutting salon with mirrors surrounded by incandescent light, creating a fiery environment for those subjected to makeup. Initially headed by a Bengali, the department saw leadership changes with a Maharashtrian and assistants from various regions, showcasing national integration long before media programs promoted it. Here, the author humorously tells the readers the makeup team could transform decent-looking individuals into hideous figures, using Pancake and other local potions, reflecting the indoor shooting style of the era. A strict hierarchy was maintained. The chief made lead actors unattractive. The senior assistant worked on secondary leads, and the junior assistant on comedians, emphasizing the structured nature of the department. In these lines, the author explains crowd actors' makeup was handled by the office boy, who mixed paint in a large vessel and applied it to close facial pores. Despite being called a boy, he was in his 40s, having joined the studio with aspirations of becoming a star or a writer. His poetic inclinations hinted at unfulfilled dreams and a deeper artistic spirit. In these lines, the author explains he worked in a cubicle with French windows, where his seemingly idle task of tearing newspapers made others think he was unoccupied. This led people, including the boss, to frequently interrupt with lectures. The makeup department boy often complained about wasted literary talent, making the narrator wish for constant crowd shooting to avoid his monologue. In these lines, the author introduces us to Kothamangalam Sabu. Frustration at Gemini Studios was often directed at Kothamangalam Sabu, the number 2 at the studio. The makeup boy blamed Sabu for his own lack of success. Sabu had a difficult start in films without the established companies or studios compared to the office boy, who had better opportunities, and Sabu also didn't have a significant educational advantage. In these lines, author continues to describe Sabu and his qualities. Despite similar beginnings, Sabu's Brahmin background exposed him to more affluent situations. He remained cheerful even after film failures, always finding work for others. His loyalty to his principle was strong, using his creativity to their benefit. Sabu thrived in the film industry, able to deliver creative solutions promptly when needed. In these lines also, the author continues to praise Sabu's quality. Sabu's ability to provide multiple solutions to complex film scenes made him invaluable to producers. If the director or story writer needed more ideas, Sabu would suggest many alternatives. For example, he could give the producer ideas as to how to shoot the fighting scene between a tigress and rat. His quick thinking and creativity greatly eased filmmaking at Gemini Studios. Sabu's role was crucial during the studio's golden years. He was also a poet, choosing to write for the masses despite his capability for more complex forms. In these lines, the author explains Sabu's literary abilities. His film success overshadowed his literary work. He wrote original story poems and the novel Thelana Mohanambal, capturing early 20th century Devadasi culture. Sabu was an excellent actor, excelling in supporting roles. His genuine love for people led to his home being a refuge for many relatives and acquaintances. In these lines, the author talks about Sabu's charitable nature and close relationship with the boss made people feel jealous. His demeanor and readiness to praise others made him appear sycophantic to some. Despite his generosity, he had enemies, particularly the makeup department boy who harbored ill wishes towards Sabu. In these lines, we learn Sabu was always seen with the boss, but officially he was part of the story department, which included a lawyer and several writers and poets. The lawyer, known as the legal advisor, cleverly handled a temperamental actress's outburst by recording and playing it back, shocking her into silence and ending her career. In these lines, we learn how the lawyer's reckless act of recording her outburst led to the end of her career. The actress' tirade against the producer was not offensive, but hearing her own voice unsettled her deeply. As a girl from the countryside, she was unprepared for such an experience. This incident marked the abrupt end of her promising acting career, inadvertently caused by the lawyer's actions in the story department. In these lines, the author tells us more about the lawyer. Unlike his colleagues in khaki uniforms, the legal advisor wore Western attire, feeling out of place among the dreamers. Allowed to produce a film, his attempt was unsuccessful. Eventually, the boss disbanded the story department, an unprecedented move, where a lawyer lost his job because poets were dismissed, highlighting the unique studio environment. In these lines, the author talks about Gemini Studios' canteen, which was a meeting hub for poets like S.D.D.A., Yogia, and Harindranath Chattopadhyaya. The studio's excellent mess offered coffee all day, providing a social setting during the Prohibition era. Most employees wore khadi, idolized Gandhiji, and lacked deep political understanding, but enjoyed the leisurely atmosphere conducive to poetry. In these lines, we learn about poets' political views. The poets at Gemini Studios, like many in South India, viewed communism negatively, associating it with godlessness, violence, and unrest. These misconceptions were prevalent and mirrored societal attitudes. When Frank Buchmann's moral rearmament group visited Madras in 1952, they were warmly hosted by Gemini Studios, despite being labeled an international circus by some. Here we learn the moral rearmament MRA group's plays Jotham Valley and The Forgotten Factor captivated Madras and the Gemini Studios family with professional presentation. Impressive sets and costumes, their influence was so profound that Tamil dramas began incorporating similar stage elements like sunrise and sunset scenes, inspired by MRA's productions, leaving a lasting impact on the local drama community. Here, the author explains later, he learned that MRA was an anti-communist movement, Despite suspicions of local big bosses like Mr. Vazen being influenced by MRA, the operations and characteristics of these leaders remained unchanged. The Gemini Studios staff enjoyed the diverse and vibrant experience of hosting MRA members, contrasting with the usual crowd actors prepared by the office boy. In these lines, we learn that months later, Gemini Studios prepared to host an English poet. The staff, familiar only with classic poets like Wordsworth and Tennyson, speculated about the visitor's identity. It turned out he was an editor, prompting excitement due to the boss's dual role as editor of Ananda Vikatan. The poet's arrival caused much curiosity and anticipation among the staff. In these lines, the author explains the English visitor, not linked to familiar British publications, stirred speculations among the staff of Gemini Studio. At 4 p.m., a tall, serious, and unknown man arrived. The boss, vague speech, filled with general terms like freedom and democracy, indicated he knew little about the visit. The poet's speech left the audience dazed and baffled, highlighting the cultural and contextual disconnect between the speaker and the audience. In these lines, the author explains the poet's speech, full of references and an accent difficult to understand, baffled the audience. The visit, highlighting the incongruity of an English poet at a Tamil film studio, left both the poet and the audience perplexed. The encounter was an unexplained mystery, reflecting the cultural gap and lack of context for such a visit. In these lines, the narrator reflects on the nature of prose writing, contrasting it with genius. Prose writing, requiring patience and resilience, often faced rejection. An announcement in The Hindu about a short story contest by The Encounter, a British periodical unknown to the Gemini literati, piqued the narrator's interest, motivating him to understand the publication before submitting his work. In these lines, the narrator explains he visited the British Council Library to know more about it before sending his entry. There, he found copies of The Encounter, a British periodical, barely read. Upon seeing the editor's name, Stephen Spender, the narrator realized it was the poet who visited Gemini Studios. This discovery felt like reconnecting with a long-lost brother, evoking a sense of shared destiny and joy, reminiscent of scenes in Indian film. In these lines, the author explains years later, after he had left working at Gemini Studio, while exploring discounted books on a Madras footpath, the narrator found The God That Failed, a collection of essays by eminent writers discussing their disillusionment with communism. Among the authors was Stephen Spender. Purchasing the book for 50 paise, the narrator was struck by the significance of Spender's inclusion, recalling his visit to Gemini Studios. In the concluding lines, the author explains he recognized Stephen Spender as the poet who had visited Gemini Studios. The narrator felt enlightened about the studio's reaction to Spender. The boss's interest lay not in Spender's poetry, but in his critical stance on communism, as reflected in The God That Failed. This revelation clarified the mysterious visit, linking Spender's ideological journey to the studio's reception of. With this, the chapter concludes. Here is the list of literary devices used in this part. Pause the video and go through it, and stay tuned for more entertaining explanations of our upcoming lessons. Thank you for joining us. Kindly like and subscribe if you found the lesson helpful. See you in the next lesson.